attended our 2 previous webinars on Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act and engaging your local election authorities on what it means to implement and the language assistance required by that Section 203 and helping them comply with federal law. So today we're going to be talking about what it means to poll monitor to ensure ballot access for the immigrant and limited English proficient voters. And I'll be using LEP as shorthand for limited English proficient voters a lot through this webinar. Just to get us started, get a roadmap of what we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to touch on the goals of poll monitoring, why we do this, engage in this kind of work on a national level and also on the local level. The rules that govern what a poll monitor, also known as poll watchers in certain areas. Here in Illinois, we call them poll watchers. What they are allowed to do at polling sites. And then we'll explain the kind of preparation that you should consider while you're getting prepared for your poll monitoring operation. This will include recruiting volunteers, preparing poll monitoring materials, recruiting, once you've recruited those volunteers, setting up trainings and what those trainings might look like, and then identifying poll sites to target for your monitoring operations on Election Day. And we'll talk a little bit about execution on Election Day, types of things to factor in and consider, and then briefly touch on post-Election Day wrap-up issues that you should be aware of prior to that day coming. Now, when we're talking about goals of poll monitoring, number one obvious goal is to ensure ballot access for voters. But this, for the Asian American community, includes access to language assistance required by Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act. Many of us operate in jurisdictions that are covered under Section 203 for certain specific languages. Here in Cook County in Illinois, we have Asian Indian language assistance as well as Chinese language assistance required under Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act. In addition to making sure that this access is provided, that this language assistance is there on Election Day, we observe and document how poll sites are set up. Are all the materials there, translated materials that are required? We observe and view how our poll workers providing language assistance or dealing with issues that are very unique to our community and our voters. By documenting that, we hopefully are able to identify problems that affect the voters. If possible, where we can, we would like our poll monitors to intervene and see if we can get those issues rectified on the same day so that voters later on in the day don't experience the same problems. And then finally, once we've collected all this information from our poll monitor volunteers and sort of aggregated all the data, we're able to identify patterns, problems that maybe we can recommend areas of improvement to the register of voters for future elections. And we'll talk about how we do that. Now, Section 203 of the Voting Rights Act, I know that many of you are familiar with this from our previous webinars, but it requires translated voting materials for a specific language minority group that's been designated for that jurisdiction. That requires everything in English being translated into that specific language. In addition, bilingual poll workers are required to be at targeted polling sites so that they can provide the language assistance needed by the voters of that language minority group, as well as pre-election publicity and outreach, letting the community know that this language assistance will be available to them on Election Day. The importance of Section 203 being properly implemented can't be highlighted more than I can't even describe how important it is to our community. Many voters face language barriers. Many of our community voters rely on language assistance to vote. They would not otherwise be able to cast a ballot due to the limited English abilities. So it's really a crucial part of why we poll monitor and why we're out there doing what we do. How do we capture and observe and document and collect all the data that we see while we're poll monitoring? Well, we use a poll monitor questionnaire. What you're looking at right now is a questionnaire used by the Asian Law Caucus in 2010. And just as a note, while this is a questionnaire that we've used in the past, we will be, as a group, the Voting Rights Group for the Asian American Center for Advancing Justice, is working on a new poll monitor questionnaire for November. It won't deviate drastically from what you're seeing right here, but it will be with slight tweaks. So for those of you that are sub-grantees, just a radar that it won't look a heck of a lot different than what you're looking at right now. So going through this, the types of things that the questionnaire captures, types of information, general information about the poll site. Was it easy to find? Were there any issues with the location? In addition, sort of the heart of the matter is, were there bilingual poll workers there? And if so, for what languages? We want to make sure that if it is a 203 covered jurisdiction, that they're providing adequate language assistance at those specific poll sites. In addition, we're going to run through a materials checklist. Make sure that translated written materials are available and visible at the poll sites. Here in Cook County, unfortunately in the March primary here in Illinois, Hindi translated materials was required, but for suburban Cook County, our poll monitors in the morning, during the morning shifts, all reported that none of the translated written materials had gotten to the polling sites. Outside of the bilingual election judges and the ballot being available in Hindi on the touchscreen monitors, none of the signs, the Voter Bill of Rights, or instructions on how to vote made it to the polling sites. So because we were out there in the morning poll monitoring, we were able to report that to the Cook County Clerk's office, and they were able to get all the materials from the warehouses that were inadvertently left behind to the polling sites for the evening rush. So that's one of the things that it's really important for our poll monitors to do, is run through the checklist and make sure everything that's there is there. Again, a general description of just recording of what they see. And then finally, another important aspect of our poll monitor operation, why we do this work, is to observe voters interacting with poll workers. Are the poll workers being proactive? Are they providing language assistance that they've been trained to do? Are they rude? There's a number of different things that can be documented. Whether it's good or bad, we want to capture as much information as possible. If something is working, and then it's a best practice that we want to share. So it's really crucial that our poll monitors are engaged and observing how voters are treated on Election Day. Now, some common problems that poll monitors might see, especially with first-time and LEP voters, is the voter at the wrong poll site. We see this a lot. Voters oftentimes change address, or precincts maybe shift, and people are no longer at the right polling site. Are the poll workers helping them find the right site, especially for those with limited English? Are they going the extra distance to make sure that the person is sent to the right polling site? Voter's name is not on a check-in roster, or they can't understand the voter's name. Not all poll workers are culturally sensitive or as familiar with Asian last names, especially if there's an LEP voter. There can be issues there with identifying them on the roster. Poll site lacks translated materials. As I said, very tangible example is here in Illinois. It definitely does happen, and it's something that can be remedied that same day if the materials are somewhere in a warehouse, or maybe perhaps just in the box in the poll site and the poll workers have failed to put them out. Poll site has translated materials, but materials are poorly displayed. Are they buried underneath English materials? Are they off in a corner? Do the poll workers make them visible and accessible to all the voters? Finally, poll site lacks bilingual poll workers. either a poll worker that was scheduled to show up canceled last second, or the ROV were just unable to find a sufficient, adequate number of poll workers that speak that specific language. All of that is information that should be documented and reported back. Some other issues. Voter is asked to show ID when it's not required by law. Now, I know some of you may reside in states that have voter ID laws. I would urge you to really check with your registrar of voters on what the ID rules and laws are for your specific jurisdiction. But many times poll workers ask for IDs, not with any malicious intent behind it, but to make their job a little bit easier. Oftentimes if there's a high turnout and the line is busy, and they're having trouble identifying folks' last names and getting them checked in on the roster, they tend to cut corners and ask for people's IDs. That's a serious no-no and something that we want to discourage, especially if other voters in line who are first-time voters see that and do not, as many of in the Asian American community don't, have a government-issued photo ID. They may be deterred from voting at all and may leave the line. Voters being sent back to the end of the line because of language barriers. Again, when there's high turnout in the evening rush and a poll worker may be struggling with a limited English voter, there may be a temptation for them to put that voter aside or ask them to stand in the back while they deal with English-speaking voters. Again, that's a no-no. That's something that our poll monitors want to keep an eye out for. They must serve the voters as they come in on a first-come, first-served basis. Next is voters unfamiliar with a voting machine. We have, with LEP voters or first-time voters, perhaps not as much experience with voting on the voting machines. Issues such as overvoting and being explained that they can correct their error. All of this needs to be done with the bilingual poll worker being involved, or at the very least with the poll worker screening for perhaps there being a misunderstanding or issue with language. Voter being denied the right to being helped by a helper of his choice, his or her choice. This is a big issue, something that a lot of folks in the community are not aware of. Section 208 of the Voting Rights Act allows anybody but your employer or your union rep to assist you in voting if you have trouble with voting in English. Advancing Justice has produced flyers translated into various Asian languages explaining your rights under Section 208. These are double-sided flyers where in English it explains your rights, and then on the other side would be in Asian language. That way voters and their helper of choice can go to the polling sites on Election Day and will have that document in case there's an issue and be able to share that with a poll worker who perhaps missed that part in the training or forgot about that being the law of the land. And again, there's poll workers also that make disparaging remarks about voters' ability to speak English. This is something we observed in March. Unfortunately, one instance where a poll worker expressed to our surprise in the presence of a poll monitor that they didn't believe that voters should be allowed to vote in anything but English. So it does happen, and in those instances, we instructed our poll monitors to notify us right away so we could have that poll worker removed from their position. Here's just a brief picture or snapshot, if you will, of what those fact sheets look like. And we will have those up on our website very soon, but we will also be sharing these PDFs with all of you on the call. For those of you that have specific language needs, please let us know. We do have it translated to several Asian languages, so we do think this is a resource for those of you that, on top of your poll monitoring efforts, are doing either get out the vote work or voter education. It's a great resource to think about using. And then, as I had mentioned, as most presidential elections do, emotions will be running high, turnout will be high, and folks tend to be very vocal about their opinions, some folks to a level where it's inappropriate. And so I think what we're looking at here is a perfect example of some voters may not be open to non-English speaking voters, and poll monitors, if there is such an issue where a voter in line is causing intimidation or making inappropriate comments, and poll workers are not doing their job in protecting LEP voters or immigrant voters from that type of intimidation, we do want them to document that and step up and let somebody know about that issue. Well, what do we do with all these poll monitor reports? And after we've collected all this information is we try to synthesize it into a report, identifying trends, common problems that we're seeing on Election Day. Here are two examples of those type of reports that we share with register our voters in order to advocate for more improvements, areas where they definitely need to spend more attention to making the access to voting better for our community. So this is something that Advancing Justice is very committed to doing. All your poll monitor reports and all the information collected, if it isn't used for advocacy, if we don't turn it into a way of pushing for more improvements, sharing best practices, engaging election officials after elections, in between elections, then we're really not maximizing the benefit of all the hard work that all of us are engaging in. Now, rules for poll watchers. Now, these vary greatly depending on which state you're in. Some states have liberal rules, allowing any member of the public to observe poll site activities. Other states have more restrictive rules, allowing only certain individuals appointed by campaigns or parties to observe the polling place activities. What we encourage you to do is check with your local register of voters on what those rules are. Oftentimes, such as here in Illinois, you have to submit a letter requesting credentials for your poll watchers. They will in turn then verify that you're a nonprofit, that you are engaging in voter protection efforts, and that you are nonpartisan, and then they will issue little credentials which your poll monitors will have to turn over to poll workers on Election Day at the poll sites. Now, so each state will handle this differently, so please do check with your register of voters on what those rules are for your specific jurisdiction. Now, recruiting volunteers. Now, this is a key component of any poll monitoring operation. We would recommend that you start about 2 months before Election Day, so we've given you a few days here to plan for that. I would recommend that we start in earnest in September and not delay that. Getting volunteers from that are willing to go to the geographic areas that you're targeting for your poll monitoring. Another thing to think about is screening your volunteers for bilingual ability. In particular, if you are in a Section 203 covered jurisdiction, finding volunteers that speak that specific Asian language or languages that you are poll monitoring for. Finally, time commitment. Volunteers, you're looking at a 2-hour training, and 2.5-hour shift on Election Day, give or take. So being very upfront about the time commitment and what's entailed oftentimes gets you the volunteers that will not cancel on you or are committed from day one. Some recruiting tips. Academic extra credit, arrangements with certain college professors for some courses, arrangements with law schools that have pro bono requirements. This is something that you would check in with the law schools. In particular, PALSAs are a good source of being able to obtain this information for you from the law school. Partnering with ethnic bar associations. Here in Illinois, we have a good relationship with the Indian Bar Association, and we are working with them and recruiting poll monitors for November for the Asian Indian Language Assistance poll sites that we're looking at. But also pro bono credit for attorney-oriented poll monitor trainings. Continuing legal education, looking into how you get accredited through that, and perhaps using the ethnic bar associations who have more experience with that process in securing that for your poll monitor trainings. And then finally, stipends for community volunteers, another great way of to consider when recruiting volunteers. When preparing for your poll monitoring, materials that would be helpful to obtain from the ROV. Well, number one, most important, is list of precincts that they're targeting for bilingual poll worker placement. These most likely would be the poll sites that they're targeting for their Section 203 language assistance. Where those locations are, where the poll site locations are, oftentimes precincts, multiple precincts are placed in one poll site, so getting that information. If there isn't a credential process or some kind of process in place for your poll monitors, getting a letter of introduction from the ROV for your poll monitors. This would be a letter just explaining who your organization is, that the ROV authorizes and recognizes the poll monitoring efforts that you're conducting on during the election. And that way, a copy of this letter could be provided to your volunteers, and they could have that in order to show any poll workers when they arrive at the poll site, in case there are any questions about what they are doing there. Guide for poll watchers. The do's and don'ts, the rules dictating what they are allowed to do at a poll site. The ROV oftentimes is the best resource for providing that information. And then finally, a phone number and email address for the ROV in order to report on Election Day any issues or problems, so they get that information in real time. Getting that information from them, getting that contact info is really a great idea, so that you can have any major issues addressed as soon as possible. In addition to that, other materials that to ask the registrar of voters for that would be helpful is hard electronic copies of their poll worker training materials. This gives you an idea of what they're telling their poll workers about language assistance, about dealing with immigrant and LEP voters, how little or how much they're being informed on it, and it gives you some background to really incorporate when training your own volunteers. Sample poll site materials. Again, in particular, samples of the translated voting materials and signs that should be found at the poll site. By having this in hand and being provided this by your ROV, when you do engage in poll monitor trainings, you're able to show your volunteers what they should be looking for. We'll be talking a little bit more about poll monitor training in our next webinar and drilling down into the details about what those trainings would look like. But something to consider is that asking for this now or as soon as possible once they are available really is helpful, so that folks know what to expect on Election Day at poll sites. And then finally, for poll monitor preparations, the materials that you're going to be providing your poll monitors. Try to think about what you would include in that poll monitor packet that you hand off to volunteers before they head off on Election Day to hit their polling sites. This, of course, includes a sufficient number of poll monitor questionnaires, name badges for those volunteers so they can identify themselves, a letter of introduction from the ROV or their credentials, however your jurisdiction handles that issue, the rules for poll watching so that they always can remember what the framework is for what they're doing at the poll sites, a list of common day, Election Day problems, a little cheat sheet. We talked about some of those problems earlier. Having a little cheat sheet that outlines those problems so that they can keep in mind things to look for when watching voter interaction with poll workers. Samples of materials in various languages. Again, any kind of little cheat sheet that gives them a hint of what they should be looking for, what things should look like, so when they're going down their checklist, they can readily identify things and move on to other things down on their questionnaire. Logistics reminder page, phone numbers, pickup, drop-off sites, anything that logistically will make your operating on Election Day for you and your poll monitoring efforts easier, you want that on a sheet so that they can have a quick reference guide on who to talk to and where to go for what. And then finally, a stipend form for those of you that are doing stipends, and make sure you include that to your volunteers so that they can hand that in along with all their other materials. Another thing to consider doing when preparing for your poll monitoring operation is checking in with other stakeholders that may be involved with your jurisdiction. In particular, talking with the DOJ attorney responsible for Section 203 enforcement in your jurisdiction. Oftentimes they have valuable information. They may be doing some poll monitoring on their own. Letting them know what you're up to and sharing that information so that they can make better decisions. For those of you that don't know who your local DOJ attorney is responsible for this, or you do know and would like an introduction, please let Advanced Justice know, and we'd be happy to help make introductions and facilitate the beginning of that discussion. In addition, there are other groups that are doing voter protection efforts in your area perhaps, but definitely checking in, seeing what groups are doing, making sure that there isn't perhaps opportunity missed for working together and covering more sites. A perfect example would be the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. They are doing poll monitoring and election protection efforts in many states. So checking in with your local branch, seeing what they're up to. Again, if you need help with or assistance with beginning that conversation, please let us know and we'd be happy to facilitate that. And then as you get closer to Election Day, you're going to want to start having your actual trainings about 3 weeks before Election Day. Consider having trainings at various times in order to accommodate some volunteers. Some will be students and can be trained during the daytime. Others who are working may have to do in the evenings. Consider doing a weekend one. In particular, some people just are not available but would love to volunteer and are not available during the weekdays. Scheduling trainings at various locations, whether on campus, community centers, law firms would be a great place, especially if you are working with the Bar Association. Getting one of them to secure a site that is convenient for other attorneys and lawyers to really reach a different crowd and making it as easy as possible for them to get trained and ready to go. And then we would recommend that you allot at least 2 hours for trainings. Again, we will be touching on this subject in our next webinar when we drill down on what poll monitoring training entails and what that will look like. But I would safely say that it will take 2 hours. Finally, just a brief summary of the kind of content that will go in that training. Confirming volunteers' contact info, making sure you know how to reach them at all times, giving poll monitor packets to volunteers, so their assignments, explain the purpose of poll monitoring, go over the applicable rules for the poll watchers, in particular for those first-timers, letting them know what they can and can't do so that they feel empowered to make decisions on Election Day. Go over the voting process for those that may not be familiar with voting in that jurisdiction or that state, or maybe are a first-time voter themselves. Running through the poll monitoring questionnaire, going through the questions. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is that while the poll monitoring questionnaire could be perfect and ask great questions, the data collected is really only useful if the poll monitor volunteer that's entering the data, that's recording his or her observations, understands what each question is asking, understands how to fill it out correctly, and if they don't put that in there in the proper form, it can really slow you down when you're doing data entry post-election, and it will require you to do more follow-ups with volunteers to clarify what they exactly meant when entering certain information. So running them through the poll monitor questionnaire, making sure they're very comfortable with the questions and understand what's being asked is a really important part of the training. In addition, role-playing, troubleshooting scenarios. I found that here in Chicago, running the poll monitor volunteers through, after they've gotten all the information, running them through a couple of hypothetical scenarios, not only is it very fun, but it gets their brains turning, it gets them thinking on their feet, and gives them a taste of sort of the types of situations they may see on Election Day, so that they have some kind of point of reference in how to deal with certain situations. It can be very, very helpful. And then finally, making sure that nobody leaves before you go over Election Day logistics, that they're clear on how things are going to be run, the timing of events and their responsibilities, and all the contact information to reach you, to report incidents, or just simply to get you the poll monitor packets and everything that, all the data that you need to collect from them. Now, identifying what poll sites to monitor. One of the best ways of doing this is to ask the registrar of voters to provide a list of precincts where bilingual poll workers are placed. If possible, ask them with an explanation of the methodology for selecting the poll sites for bilingual assistance, and checking in with the DOJ. Ask them what their analysis of voter registration files for their jurisdiction are. They may or may not have this information, but it's not a bad idea to check in with them and check. Consider selecting poll sites with bilingual poll workers assigned. These would be the ones targeted for Section 203 language assistance. And also, if there's capacity and extra volunteers, consider poll monitoring at places poll sites that don't have bilingual poll workers assigned. If these are areas with a high immigrant or LEP voter density, or you're aware of one that isn't being targeted, but you believe the ROV should be targeting that for Section 203 language assistance, or just there's a high number of Asian Americans there. If possible, I think it would be great to send poll monitors there just to see what their experience is like with poll workers there, how they're providing assistance where possible to those voters. And when deploying those poll monitors, giving them their poll monitor assignments to the volunteers, you can give it to them in training along with their packets, or if volunteers are still coming in and you're still trying to make the best determination of where to allocate your volunteers, following up with them by email, and just being very clear on which polling places they're going to and what their marching orders are. Providing reminder phone calls and emails to check in just a couple of days before Election Day, making sure that nothing in their schedule has changed, that you won't get any late no-shows or any mini emergencies where you have to shift volunteers. So it's a good idea to check in with your volunteers, make sure that nothing has changed and they're all set to go. And finally, on Election Day, executing your poll monitoring operation, some things to consider. Sending poll monitors out in morning shifts, spending at least an hour per poll site. Again, this is identifying, making sure all the translated written materials that are supposed to be there are there, that any bilingual poll workers that are supposed to be there are there. Really screen for any issues that we've talked about, trying to identify any problems that perhaps could be rectified before the end of the day. In addition, just getting the information to you so that you can really update the ROVs on what's going on at the poll sites. Having 2 to 4 staff at your office fielding calls for monitors. This gives you the flexibility to talk to volunteers, report to the ROV any issues that you're seeing, entering data that you're getting in real time, and then taking phone calls from the ROV that hopefully are updating you on what kind of progress they can make in addressing any kind of issues on Election Day. Working with them. We cannot stress that most ROVs are responsive to really addressing serious issues. It is in their interest to make sure that voters are provided the language assistance required under federal law. So as much as possible, this information that we provide them is something that they can find very useful. And I think the one thing we want to be very mindful about is documenting our conversations with them. As part of that effort, keeping a collective chart on Google Docs where you track where your poll monitor volunteers are, any issues or observations that they've reported in, called in, getting that documented, the time they called in, and then documenting any phone calls, the time as well that you have with the ROV about those issues and what their response was. All of this is something to really keep in mind, to plan for, and we'd highly recommend that it's done in advance so that you're ready to go and not having to scramble at the last second when issues do arise. In addition to the morning shift, something we will be, that Advancing Justice has identified as a potential thing to consider is oftentimes morning shift volunteers, if that's the only group of volunteers that you send out, if they're identifying issues or problems on Election Day and you're reporting it to election authorities, to the ROVs, there is no follow-up way of verifying that those issues have been addressed. So something to consider is saving volunteers if possible, if there are those that find the afternoon or evening shift preferable, to check up on those problematic poll sites and to see if the issues were addressed. If the problems persist, then documenting that. If there are high-density sites where there's expected a large number of turnout due to the population density in your community, consider targeting that polling site for poll monitoring in the evening when turnout oftentimes is higher. These are all things to work out. I imagine that many of you will be having this discussion with your subgrantor, and so that something to really consider is if you do have capacity and a large number of volunteers, to consider sending some of them out to follow up on problematic poll sites or high-traffic sites. To the extent possible, have your poll monitors send off and drop off their poll monitor packets on Election Day. One way of dealing with the issue of having a large geographic area to cover is assigning either staff or a particularly exceptional volunteer to serve as a regional drop-off site that they can collect the poll monitor packets and then bring them to your office that same day. That way, at the end of election night, all the poll monitor packets will be securely in your office or at a secure site, and there's no worry of losing any kind of information that you'll need in order to really make your case for improvements. Finally, post-election day wrap-up. Some things to consider that you want to do the day after election. Follow up with your poll monitors. Collect the poll monitor packets. Reviewing the poll monitor questionnaires and following up with monitors to clarify any ambiguities. Oftentimes poll monitors, as great as they are, and as much as we've trained them, things move fast sometimes on election day at poll sites. Sometimes questions are missed. Following up with them, seeing if they can remember. Maybe perhaps they did make a mental note somewhere or wrote it down, but it didn't include it in the poll monitoring questionnaire. Other volunteers, they document a lot of information, but their handwriting leaves something to be desired, and you're not able to discern exactly what they're saying. Following up with them, trying to read it back to them, trying to jog their memory. The longer you wait to do those follow-ups, the foggier their memories will be, and so it's really a great idea to try to follow with them as soon as possible. I understand it takes a certain amount of capacity and being able to review all the poll monitor questionnaires, but it really is valuable to make sure that you get all the information from them and are able to make sense of the efforts that they made in documenting any kind of issues. Developing a high-level summary of observations. This sometimes, is in response to media. This is not a deep-level analysis, but sometimes it's if you are able to identify some really great things or some patterns of a persistent issue or problem, getting that information out into the press as part of your advocacy work, reporting that to Advancing Justice, if that's part of your MOU. Collecting that information is something that you should set aside some time and be aware of. It may be part of your post-election day wrap-up. Following up with voters who are experienced problems voting. If your poll monitor volunteers documented an incident and were able to secure the contact information of that voter, following up with that voter, confirming their story, getting more information. The best time to do that is when it's fresh in their mind and right after Election Day, so that nothing is lost and you're able to really maximize the benefit of having that incident reported and documented. And that pretty much brings us to the end of the presentation. I want to thank you for your time. At this point, we're going to be opening up to questions, and I believe Carlo is going to be the Q&A. Both Deanna Kitamura from APALC and I will be available. We look forward to those questions.
Thanks, Andy. And I just wanted to make sure we want to do question and answer before giving time for the staff from the Alliance for Justice to speak. Okay. So I will go ahead and unmute folks as they raise their hand, or we could also address some of the questions that came in during the presentation. I believe many of these were addressed throughout the presentations, but I think it would be helpful if we could just review them so we can get more clarity. So Andy or Deanna, would you care to answer just the questions as they came in, even if they've already been addressed in the presentation? The first one is, how do we get permission to be in the polls, and does each poll monitor need to have a letter or permission to be within the poll site? So I think this asks, what are the general rules and regulations around poll monitors, and how would an organization that has never gotten permission before go about it? So maybe you can explain how we write our letter and what our usual methods of receiving the authorization is.
Yeah, I can touch really briefly on how we do it here in Illinois, but this was my first go-around in March, and I lean heavily, obviously, on my Advancing Justice compatriots here, but here in Illinois, all that's required is for you to write a letter requesting poll monitor credentials from the ROV, so identifying, calling ahead and identifying who you need to address that letter to. You explain who your organization is, that you're a 501c3, interested in poll monitoring for language assistance to your community. And this is the type of thing that, so the requirements should be listed either online on their website, or they'll have some kind of document on file for to share with you. So it's really contacting your ROV, talking to them. They oftentimes already issue poll monitor credentials if that's something they do to campaigns. So the process should be in place. It's just a matter of calling, checking in, and yes, sometimes it will require you to write a letter in order to secure those credentials. Deanna, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, hi folks, this is Deanna Kitamura at the Asian Pacific American Legal Center. It's really based on state by state, it's the laws of the state. And so here in California, anybody can go to the polls, and we're allowed to stand there and monitor. And we actually don't need anything to give us permission or anything like that. But it's always a good idea to work with your registrar of voters, no matter where you are. We work with our registrar of voters very early on to make sure, as Andy was talking about, to make sure that all the Section 203 languages, all the materials are translated, and everything is done very early on. And so it's very important to have that good relationship with the registrar of voters. And then when you, even though we don't need to have anything that says that we are entitled to be a poll monitor, we ask the registrar to give us something that's just in case there's ever a question. And so our registrar of voters here in Los Angeles gives us prints up these certificates that says that we are poll monitors. And so if there's ever a question, we can show that to the poll worker. But so whatever your state requires, you'll have to figure that out. But just work with your registrar of voters to make sure that there's not any problems to your being able to be a monitor.
And so we have a hand from Nuri Han, so I'll just unmute them now so they can ask their question. Nuri? Is your microphone working?
Oh, yeah, it's working. Thank you. This is Nuri Han from Korean American Voters Council from New Jersey. We conducted the primary, on the primary election, we conducted the exit poll survey, and also, but the thing is, New Jersey law is we cannot go within the 100 feet, so we can't do these activities outside of the 100 feet of the poll site, which was a really hard time to kind of figure out and then meet the registered voter because the 100 feet and everyone just parking right in front of the poll site, so it was really hard. So my question is, can you suggest some activities can you do outside of the 100 feet of the poll site for the election day?
So are you saying that you're not allowed to do any poll monitoring, or just normally you can't do electioneering 100 feet from the poll site, and perhaps your state is also saying that you can't do surveying as well, but are you saying you can't actually do any poll monitoring within the polls?
Yeah, we can't. No, we cannot do any poll monitoring within 100 feet. New Jersey law changed in 2009, so we cannot do any poll monitoring within 100 feet. Only media people can do that. Yeah, so can you suggest any activities so we can still do?
Well, if you're doing surveying, if you're willing to do surveying, I suppose you could just ask the voters if they had any problems accessing materials that should be translated, and if they had any problems with the machines, especially if they were supposed to have the translated ballots. But that is a problem with the fact that you can't actually go into the polls.
Right.
Yeah.
So can you suggest any other ways so we can do better on the general election day?
You know, Nuri, I don't know if your organization is also doing get out the vote work, but if it's something that some of our community partners do here in Chicago, and we don't have that issue, so we do have poll monitors allowed if they have credentials on site, but like in the Korean community, KRCC in particular focuses on early voting, so they get a lot of their limited English-speaking voters to show up at a poll site, early voting poll site on a Saturday, and they have volunteers to assist in voting. And by being able to assist, they're able to go onto the poll site and help those voters vote and see how things are run. If we're talking about Section 203, Deanna, I think that's something that's worth us following up on and looking at New Jersey, why they're not allowing poll monitors in the site. I mean,
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, let us look into that a little bit.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are working on it until 2008. Like within 100 feet was okay, but as my understanding, we talked with Bergen County, New Jersey. So it's Korean language service available from this year. But the thing is, they said it's a law change, so we cannot do any. The non-profit organization they cannot do poll monitor within 100 feet. So can you also kind of look into it? So maybe we can change the policy, maybe, or do other activities.
Yeah, Nuri, we'll definitely follow up with you on that.
Thank you.
So we have another question that came in during the presentation with regards to if there's any age restriction on poll monitors. So it came from Alexandra Lucas. The question was, are teens allowed to act as poll monitors? Can they be between the ages of 14 and 18, or does it have to be only individuals who are 18 and over? So if one of our panelists could address this.
At least in California, there are no limits in terms of the age although we found that poll workers tend not to pay attention to what a high school student is saying, telling them. Like, oftentimes we have our poll monitors take a more proactive role, not just tell us what they're observing, but also if, for example, the translated materials are not viewable, we'll have the monitor actually ask that they be placed out and fanned out so that all the languages can be seen. And we found that high school students are oftentimes dismissed when they make a suggestion. And so we have tended to use college students or people who are older than college students to actually do the monitoring. Although, again, in California at least, we don't have a prohibition against using high school students. And actually we have found that high school students are actually some of the most reliable volunteers, and we just use them for other things.
Yeah, unfortunately in Illinois, you have to be a registered voter so for that jurisdiction. So we aren't able to use high schoolers, but we do use college students, law students, attorneys, just regular community activists, people who are volunteers. You know, again, it goes back to the heart of checking in with your ROV about what the poll monitor credential system is, if there's one in place. You know, it sounds like we have some research to do about New Jersey, but it will vary. I wish everywhere was like California, because that would be great. I would have a lot more volunteers on Election Day.
Okay, so we just have one more question, and I believe we can turn it over to our guest. So the last question that came through was if there's any available data or numbers of Asian Pacific American registered voters by subgroup category.
Yeah, I don't know if I looked at our demographic report. It's not in that the national report that we put out, and I don't know if it's available through the census.
So for folks who may not be aware, the national demographic report that Deanna is referring to is entitled Community of Contrast. It breaks down the data from the 2010 census as well as other sources of data and helps kind of give our community a greater understanding of where our communities are, what are some of the statistics, and it's available on advancingjustice.org. It doesn't have the voter breakdown by subgroup, but it does have a lot of useful information such as naturalization rates, civic engagement turnouts, and things like that. And Terry Minnis, if you had anything else to add, Terry is our colleague from the Asian American Justice Center in DC.
Sure. Thanks, Carlo. Just wanted to let folks know that the census data that's provided on registration and turnout numbers and percentages come from the Census Bureau, comes from the current population survey, and it's not broken down by sub-population groups. You can pretty much find the Asian American data for the national level as well as by state, but I don't believe it goes anything lower than state, and it's not broken out by the groups as I had mentioned.
Terry, do you want to address the HAVA question that came in that you had responded to?
Sure. So the question was with respect to first-time voters and whether or not they needed to show identification. And so under the Help America Vote Act of 2002, the requirement is that if you are a first-time voter who registered by mail, then you would have to show an ID when you went to go vote after registering for the first time. And then in the question, in the answer part of it, it provides a list of, I provided a list of the acceptable form of IDs that can be used for that purpose. So this is outside of whether or not your state has any voter ID requirements. This is a federal law. So there may be additional requirements if your state has passed a voter ID requirement, a photo voter ID requirement.
Okay, great. So I just wanted to reiterate that our contact information is on the screen now. And so if there are any other questions that attendees have as follow-up, feel free to email us individually, and we can definitely try to follow up with you. Now I'd just like to turn it over back to Andy, who will introduce our guest, who will speak a little bit more on similar voting rights issues, but in a different field.
Yeah, I'd like us to welcome Ms. Nayantara Mehta from, she's a senior counsel at the Alliance for Justice. And she, for those of you that are doing voter education or any kind of good get out the vote work in addition to your poll monitoring this year, she's going to be talking a little bit about federal tax law and sort of the guidelines for nonprofits that engage in voter education or election-related activity. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Ms. Mehta.
Thanks, Andy. Carlo, are you going to make me a presenter? Just checking.
Yes.
Sorry for the pause. Okay, sorry. We're just transitioning between presentations, and I will be showing you what I mean to show you right now. Hopefully, everyone's seeing that. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Andy and Deanna and Carlo for having me, kind of tacking me on to the end of the presentation. We asked if we could present a little bit of the content that I'm going to present today because we think it's just really important for any 501c3 that's getting involved in this year's election or really any election to have a good grounding in the basic rules for 501c3s. So what you've heard already today is a discussion of federal law, the Voting Rights Act. You've heard about different states' voter registration laws like New Jersey and Illinois and California. And now what I'm about to tell you about in just a few minutes, and I'm happy to take questions if they come up, what I'm about to tell you about is federal tax law, as Andy mentioned. And it may seem strange that federal tax law applies here, but the reason that it does is because if you're a 501c3, that tax status, 501c3 status is a tax status, it's granted by the Internal Revenue Service, the taxing authority. And so if you're a 501c3, you need to be aware of tax law. And the basic rule for 501c3s is that we cannot support or oppose candidates for public office. And you probably all know this already. And I just want to reiterate that as C3s, that's just a flat-out prohibition. We can't tell people who to vote for, how they should vote. This goes for whether we're doing voter education or poll monitoring. But there's a lot we can do as a 501c3. And so I'm going to say a little bit about those activities. But what my goal for today, just this few-minute presentation, is to make sure that you know that we at Alliance for Justice are a resource for these types of questions around what can 501c3s do around elections. What's consistent with 501c3 status. And I'm going to have a slide at the very end that directs you to some of our resources. Some of the many activities that C3s are engaging in this election year and that we get questions about every day are issue advocacy, talking about the stuff you always talk about, but it's an election year, and that's totally fine to do. You just want to make sure as a C3 when you're talking about your issues, especially when they're kind of controversial election issues, like let's say you work on immigration reform issues or access to reproductive health services for women. And maybe that's what you do on a regular basis, and then these become big election issues. So you can certainly keep talking about them, but you sometimes have to be a little bit sensitive to how you talk about them when it's close to the election. And there's also all kinds of candidate education you can do as a 501c3. You can help candidates better understand your issues so that whoever is elected to office has a good grounding in the issues that you work on, and you hope that they will turn to you with questions about, or they will turn to you as a resource when they're actually elected. Voter education, you can do candidate forums, candidate debates, candidate questionnaires. You can do voter outreach, registering voters, getting out the vote. You can support or oppose ballot measures. You can definitely take a position on ballot measures, although as a C3 you can't support and oppose candidates. The IRS is perfectly fine with 501c3 supporting or opposing ballot measures because actually the IRS treats ballot measure work as lobbying, which C3s are allowed to do. And I am going over these activities really quickly and briefly. I could spend an hour talking about all these activities, but I just want to flag the fact that although I started out by saying as a C3 we can't support or oppose candidates, I want to make it clear there's plenty we can do. And of course, for purposes of today, as C3s, we can definitely get involved in election protection activities and helping protect the right to vote in various ways, engaging in poll monitoring activities. And so I'm going to say just a little bit more about that. And any one of you who works in the area of voting access and voting rights probably aware of all the different state laws around the country that are making it just a little bit harder to vote in different states. And of course, different states have different rules for what kind of ID is allowed and those kinds of things. And voter suppression efforts can come in a lot of different forms, but essentially any policy or practice that discourages or prevents people from voting. You may have heard Attorney General Holder recently compared voter ID laws to poll tax. Other forms of voter suppression can be requiring proof of citizenship for registering or for voting, intimidating voters, failing to provide voting material in the required languages, which you've heard all about, and limiting the rights of ex-felons. So there's a lot of different ways that it can be hard for people to vote. And of course, the topic that you all are hopefully going to be working on is making sure that people have access to election materials in their language. And you may have heard of the group True the Vote, and they suggest that they're going to recruit 1 million volunteers for Election Day. And what we're concerned about is that their real goal is to intimidate voters and suppress voting. So it's really important for people who want to encourage as many people as possible to vote to be out there making sure people can access their right to vote. And Andy already mentioned that the Election Protection Coalition is out there. I wanted to just highlight that they have a lot of useful resources. They have a hotline. They have state-by-state summaries on voting-related laws. And so now is where I get to the part where I tell you about the laws. If you're doing poll monitoring or other election protection activities, what I'm about to tell you is fairly common sense. You may not even need me to tell you this, but I just want to make sure you know these rules. If you or your organization is going to be engaged in poll monitoring, or if you're going to be working with volunteers, that when you go out to the polls and you're representing a 501c3, you can't say who you think is a better party or candidate. That's not a 501c3 appropriate kind of communication. You shouldn't suggest who people should vote for. You're there to make sure people get to exercise their right to vote, not tell them who to vote for. When you target your activities, so let's say you're trying to figure out which voting sites are you going to send people to, where are you going to send your volunteers. When you make those decisions about where to target, because presumably you're not going to cover an entire state or entire region, you're going to be selective about where you go. Presumably your reasons for targeting are going to be things like there's a large population here that has limited English proficiency, or this is a voting site where they've had problems in the past with providing required documentation. Those are perfectly legitimate nonpartisan reasons for targeting your activities. What's not an appropriate nonpartisan reason for targeting is we want to make sure we're at this site because a lot of people who are likely to vote for a certain party or a certain candidate are going to vote there. So that's not an appropriate reason for why you choose a place to do your poll monitoring. So you want to focus on the nonpartisan reasons. And if you're going to be training volunteers and they're going to be maybe wearing your T-shirts or representing themselves as being a volunteer from your C3 organization, make sure they understand these rules too. You can't assume that they know they're not supposed to talk about who to vote for. If you haven't told them that, why would they know that? So it's just important that you train volunteers, because if they're going to be speaking on your behalf as a representative of your C3, then what they say is treated as if your C3 is saying it. So just take a little bit of care beforehand in making sure that your volunteers are equipped with the information they need. And we have a ton of resources. So I've breezed through all this information. We have a California office. We have our main DC office. We have a free technical assistance service. The contact information is about halfway down the screen. You can email us or call us, a toll-free number, and you can reach the Day's on-call attorney. We have a ton of written materials on our website, boulderadvocacy.org. And I think in particular, one particular publication that I would direct you to, if you want a fairly comprehensive one, is this one we have called The Rules of the Game. And it covers all kinds of different election activities like voter education, candidate forums, voter registration drives, all these kinds of things. How can you stay C3 compliant? So excuse me for speaking really quickly. I will be happy to answer any specific questions, but like I said, we also have free technical assistance. So anytime a question occurs to you along these lines, you're welcome to contact us.
Thank you. So I just want to thank the Alliance for Justice again for sharing some of the valuable work and information that you're doing around voting. So I, again, just wanted to open it up for questions in case any lingering questions came out of the last 10 minutes or folks have new questions with the new information that was just presented. So again, if anyone wants to raise their hand, that way you can share audio quality, or if want to chat any of the questions into the box. Okay, so I just want to give one last opportunity for any of our panelists to also say any last words, any last information that they want to share or plug to the group. Okay, hearing none. So I just want to thank everyone again for joining us for our fourth webinar presented by the Asian American Center for Advancing Justice. Advancing Justice is comprised of 4 organizations, the Asian American Justice Center in Washington, D.C., the Asian American Institute in Chicago, the Asian Pacific American Legal Center based in Southern California, and the Asian Law Caucus based in San Francisco. So we will continue to do advocacy work around Section 203, and we'll have new resources and materials made available. We have the attendee list in your email, so we'll be emailing out the PDF of this presentation to you all, and we'll also have a few links to future resources that you can access, some of the resources that Andy mentioned earlier. And if the Alliance for Justice is more than happy to share the PDF of their presentation, we can send that out via email as well. I just want to thank you all for joining us today, and we hope that you found the webinar useful and informative. Thank you.